Hello and welcome to Three Peaks Podcast, where we have fun times talking about careers with some interviews and questions. Today we have a very special guest, Robert Hayman. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So you are a founder and CEO, but we don't know that much about you. So we'd like to give you the opportunity to introduce yourselves and tell us more about your hobbies.
Okay. Well, I was raised in Los Angeles, in the Beverly Hills area of Los Angeles. I would say my family had a very big impact on my life, especially my father. And he was one of the founders of a street called Rodeo Drive in Beverly Hills. And, I spent a lot of time on that street as a youngster, but I also spent a lot of time in Ohio, in a little small town called Mansfield, Ohio. Now they could have filmed there was a film that came out a long time ago before you guys were born called The Coal Miner's Daughter. But if you go and take a look at it, it's about hillbillies, and they could have filmed this film there. So I had a real big juxtaposition between the two. In one area I was basically hanging out with hillbillies in the summer and Beverly Hills brats in the winter when I went to school. And my hobbies are really, I love sports. I love to hike, run, tennis. I'm a big tennis fan and player. And I have two kids, Gabrielle and Julian. And I live in the Seattle area of Washington, outside of Seattle, actually, in what's called East Lake, Washington, in a town called Kirkland, right on the water. So I'm looking at the lake right now in the background.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So we did some research on you, and we saw that you were the CEO and principal of Hayman Properties, right?
Correct.
So I was kind of wondering, how did you get your start in real estate?
I actually bought my first piece of real estate a long time ago. It was in about 40 years ago, believe it or not. It was a small multifamily property that was in the Brentwood area of California, Los Angeles, California. And then from there, I started investing with other people and putting, what I thought was a lot of money to work at the time, but and it did very well. I mean, real estate's something that I really have never lost any money on. It's always been very good. So when I started to accumulate more, and I actually had what they call a liquidity event. I had a company that we sold. I decided to create a real estate investment company and put a lot of that money into real estate, commercial real estate. We started off with multifamily. We don't have too much of that anymore. We have mostly office properties. And obviously, office properties are attractive. They're fun. The last few years with the pandemic haven't been the easiest with all the work from home policies and things like that going on. But still, it's been overall very, very good. So that's how I started it. And, we're operating up here now in the Seattle area. Our offices are in a town called Redmond, Washington, which is not too far from here.
Yeah. And with real estate, I feel like there's a ton of different properties to look at and all of that stuff. So what help makes a property stand out to you?
Well, the old saying, what are the three most important things in real estate? And the old Jewish real estate guy goes location, location, and location. And I would say location is very important. But we look for certain things. We have a concept called Vibe, boutique office properties. And we essentially buy properties that are in good locations, and they need to be rehabilitated. They've already gone through one life, and we rehabilitate them. We turn them into really boutique office properties, and they're special. They're different. They have character. They have a certain signature to them. It's a vibe sort of signature. And so, if you want to think about an analogy, back in the 80s, there were all sorts of great hotels. I mean, there was a Hilton, there was a Marriott, there was a Sheraton, and a lot of others. some silly little company comes along called the W Hotel, and they open up a really incredible hotel. And today, all they're opening up anymore pretty much is boutique hotels. So we're kind of doing the same thing in the office space, and it's expanding. We just added 2 more, and we've converted quite a few over, and we have a portion of it which is it's boutique, it's different, it's special. It's not like the other, aluminum and glass and marble, and this is special. It feels different. It feels better. It feels more like you're at home in a way. And we incorporate some what's called co-working space. If you think of WeWork, okay, that's co-working space. So as part of our ecosystem, we have co-working, we have all sorts of amenities, gyms, and help desks, and all sorts of things in there that really make it a fun, special place that feels kind of like home. That feeling. Sometimes you get a long, busy day. You get home and put your backpack down. It feels like I'm finally home. That's kind of how we want you to feel when when you're working in one of our buildings. You kind of come home.
Yeah. And with making these buildings, I'm pretty sure there has to be a certain process that you have to go through to make sure that you're getting the right aesthetic correct, and like lighting and like just making sure everything is put together well. What is your creative process for doing buildings?
So the properties that we buy and the buildings that we rehabilitate, which is literally all of them, they go through a process we call vibing it out. So we vibe out these buildings. Pretty convenient name. And there's something that we have, which is like the brand equity book. It's the look book for vibe. And it's sort of our Bible. And we have a number of different looks that fit the vibe equity brand type. And then we incorporate about 60-70%, which would be that branded look, that feel that people get comfortable with after a while. And then we incorporate the rest of it, which is 30 or 40% would be more indigenous to that area. So for instance, we have a property that's in Cottonwood Canyon, Utah, in the Salt Lake City area. It's the highest elevation property actually in the Salt Lake City area. It's right before you get to Cottonwood Canyon. It leads into Snowbird and Alta and those ski resorts. And it's kind of a very cool little area. It's nestled against the mountains back there, which are just spectacular and scenic and grand. But this property has a lot of that type of indigenous character to it. We put a lot of artwork and things to it that really speak to the location that it's in. Skiing, the mountains, the forests that are there, the Rockies themselves. So that's sort of what we do with this.
Also, when you're building a building for a company, do you ever get like an offer from a company asking you to like create their building?
We have had that happen a few times, where we would go in and do that third party for a property that we wouldn't own. But we're pretty busy right now, and so we have barely enough time to do what we own, and we're looking pretty soon to acquire more buildings. Now the pandemic's over, people are starting to go back into the offices again. We think there's a big opportunity right now to acquire more office buildings and more properties. So we don't really, I don't think we would have time to do that right now.
And with real estate, I feel like it's very competitive in trying to like getting the right property, and a lot of people are interested in it. So how do you kind of like get that property instead of someone else?
Well, it comes down to a bidding process in most cases, and you have a property that's on the market, and it depends on what you do with it. And I think that with a vibe concept, we have an unfair advantage, and that's what we've tried to do. We've tried to think out of the box and find something that has an unfair advantage and that is unique and different, a point of difference. And so with that point of difference, we can get a higher rate of return. It's called an internal rate of return. You get every single year. We get a higher rate of return on a property than most other property companies would be able to get by just doing the standard nuts and bolts rehab job.
So you stated before that one of your favorite quotes are "Every battle is won before it is fought." Could you tell us more about why that is your favorite quote?
Oh, I don't think it's my favorite. I have a number of them. One of them is failure is not an option. But there's others as well. I think that, in general, I try not to take things too heavy-handed, and I think that you take a quote by Sun Tzu, and I think that's one of them, and you just sort of, they're fun to play with. I think that it's just something that you sort of, I don't live my life by it, but at the moment it can be appropriate. Another one I love is also, from a wonderful, wonderful human being and one of the great icons in business, probably the guy I respected the most in business, maybe until Elon Musk came along, was a guy named Lee Iacocca. And he was a guy who ran Chrysler for a number of years, again, long before you were born. He's no longer with us, but he had a saying, lead, follow, or get the hell out of the way. And I used to love that one too. So there's others as well, lots of them. Winston Churchill, if you ever look him up and look at a number of his quotes, brilliant guy, a lot of really fun and brilliant quotes. And you can just look through those on a, every once in a while basis. And it's kind of inspirational.
Nice. And with your company, is there a lot of traveling that's involved?
Yeah, I mean, I do two things. One is the real estate business, and I have a great team running that. And then the other is medical technology. And we have a technology right now that's in the dental space that we're getting ready to launch within the next 6 to 9 months, hopefully, on a pilot basis at least. And that's also up here in the Northwest, in the Washington State area, and have a great team there as well. And that one's, we're adding to that team as well. So it's very exciting. The idea of running two companies, you can't do it unless you have a great team. And so I focused my time on both of them as needed, but right now they're both doing extremely well.
And one question I just want to ask about you being able to travel to numerous places is, what are some items that you always have to take along with you when you're traveling?
Forgive me, I didn't really answer your question before. The question you asked is about traveling. I travel probably once every week or two, and I'll usually go to any number of different cities, but usually, sometimes I go visit our properties that are in various cities, Denver, Los Angeles, Salt Lake City, Houston, Austin, up here in Redmond, and others. And other times I'll just go for business down into Southern California, New York, Chicago, wherever I need to go. But I travel probably once every week or two. Some of the indispensables, I mean, you can't survive today anymore without a computer. And I find a laptop to be indispensable. I mean, phones are great, but you need the screen size to read reports. It's almost impossible to read reports or see certain things, on a phone, that's this size. Forget about it. You need to have a screen like I'm here. I'm looking at something, I can read things on it. High def, all the better.
And with all the traveling you do you think that with the places you go to, do you think in your mind you keep some of the stuff that you see and try and put it into your buildings?
Anytime I see something, no matter where I'm at, I'll take a picture and I'll just put it into a file on email called ideas, and the ideas will be attached to something else as well. Yeah, all the time. That's a great question. I think that they have that old saying, there are no original ideas. Everyone steals another idea from something else. You look at Steve Jobs, who created the iPhone. Well, I mean, did he really, he came up with the idea of putting together that storage system and solving the problem that they had in music with Napster at the time, and putting it on a screen that was had no buttons on it. You use a touch screen like this one and a battery, and hooking a phone up to it with an address book, and before you know it, we have this incredible Apple phone or Android phones as well. That's what I use, quite frankly. But so there are no new ideas, and I look at I look at ideas all the time, and I'm sometimes blown away by some of the simplest things that are right in front of people that they just don't see, or I don't see for that matter, until finally the light bulb goes off.
And with being in real estate, I'm pretty sure there's a lot of chaos and like stress that comes along with the job.
I think anything you do, if you're serious about it and you're good at it, A, you probably love it. But B, because you love it, you're passionate about it, and there can be challenges. And no matter how much you love it, how passionate you are about it, there's times where it can be stressful. And of course, the more conservative you are, the less stressful the job is going to be. Typically, not always, but typically. But the more you extend yourself and the more you put yourself out there, the more risk you're taking. The more risk, sometimes the more reward, as long as it's an intelligent risk. And that's sort of being an entrepreneur, and that's capitalism, risk and reward.
And I liked what you said. Taking risk is something that's very important for people to do, to kind of explore more of what they're trying to do. So how do you think we should start taking risk more in our lives?
Well, there's different types of risks. There's risks that are monetary risks. There are risks that are social risks. There are risks that are, all sorts of risks. I mean, some people are very afraid to step out. They're afraid of their own shadows, right? And they're afraid to ever try and do something. And because they're afraid of trying to do something, they don't end up doing anything. You know that old saying, Nike had, just do it?
Yeah.
There was a guy named Reverend Ike, and I don't even know if he's alive anymore, but he used to come into my father's store called Giorgio Beverly Hills at the time, yellow and white awning stripes, and a lot of fun. This guy came in with a whole entourage, and he would go into the men's department. And I was probably about your age right now. And I worked at the store from time to time, and he got a kick out of me because I was sitting there young and just working and doing my thing. And he goes, Robert, let me tell you one thing. You have a good idea, don't waste it. Do something with it. 99 people out of 100 have a great idea. They just sit on it. They're too afraid to do anything. That other 1%, they go out, they act. Sometimes they fail, but a lot of times they win. And Nike had nothing on him. Just do it. That was his saying. And so I think that you got to be afraid to take risks. You can't be afraid to live your life. You can't be afraid to go out and if you even when it comes to relationships, if you see somebody you like them, if they don't know about it, if you're too afraid to step out and say something, that you might lose. Same thing with fashion. If you want to wear something and you're afraid of what people are going to say about you, well, who really cares? So at the end of the day, there's all sorts of risks and there's all sorts of risk rewards, but I think you got to step out there and live your life. I've never personally, and I don't want to preach because I've certainly made a lot of mistakes in my life, but I've never really worried about what people thought about me, like whether, I'm going to fail and then people are going to look at me and say, oh God, that's just horrible. I really never thought twice about that. If I failed, I failed. At least I tried, and so many people didn't. Yeah. So I would say that, stepping out there and trying and just doing it and doing the best you can, and not just, doing it and then failing and then giving up. But sometimes, you haven't failed, but you gave up. You gave up too soon. And I think that that's another aspect. But yeah, you got to go out there. I just my personal feeling is you got to go out there. You got to take risks. You can't be afraid of what people think. And for those people who say something and and you're taking a risk and they say something and it's inappropriate or it's misplaced, the hell with them. Honestly, those aren't your friends. And they're probably not taking any risks.
Yeah.
So
one thing I wanted to ask is, how do you unwind from like a hectic day at the office?
I get home and it's that same feel, like, I come in the door and I put my bag down, my knapsack, my satchel down. I'll maybe sometimes I'll go for a run. Sometimes, I've got to go run out for a dinner. And there's just all sorts of different ways. Sometimes I just sit down and think about what happened during the day, and maybe I do meditate from time to time, take 30 minutes and sit there quietly. What's beautiful about living here is when the weather's appropriate, I can sit out on my dock and just be there by myself. In the summertime here, I'll take a stand-up paddleboard and I'll paddle out. But typically I'll go for a light jog or something like that, or paddleboard, or just walk down to have some dinner someplace, meet somebody.
Absolutely. And with everyday life, a lot of people are building up constant stress and they hardly have time to do healthy activities. So I wanted to ask you, why is it important for everyone to unwind and do some healthy habits?
Well, I think healthy habits are healthy. So that's an easy one. Look, everybody has their own way of doing things. I personally, I'm not trying to preach to anybody, but I like to work out in the mornings. I get up early. I get an hour or two of work done in the morning. Then I head off to the gym most mornings. Then I get back, head off to work, or usually I head off to the office. But that's sort of a routine, and I think it's good to have routines. It's a form of discipline. It's funny. I listened to this general, and I forget his name, but he gave us a speech. I think it was at a graduation of a university, and it was so simple. He had this one idea: get up every morning, and the first thing you do is you make your bed. Silly as that sounds, you've accomplished something. You did a good job.
Yeah.
You did it. Do you know the person?
Yeah, I remember it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That had an impact on me. Now I do it anyway, but every time I do it, I kind of think of this guy like I've accomplished something. Now I accomplished one thing so far during the day. I did a good job at it. I move on to the next thing, and there's a routine that's involved. So I think it's good to have a routine. I think routine is a healthy habit as long as it's a good routine. And then, during the day, you get through work, and I got to tell you, the most important thing, the healthiest habit you can develop is find something you love to do. If you got a job and you got to sort of dread going there, and you step in the office and you're just waiting until the first break, and you're waiting till lunch, and you're waiting till it's done, you're waiting till hump day, then Friday, and then weekend, that's just not the way to go through life. Find something you love to do. That's probably the healthiest habit I can think of. Healthy for your brain, healthy for your psyche, healthy for your spirit, also probably healthy for your body.
Yeah.
So if you love what you're doing, when Friday comes, you almost sometimes can't wait till Monday. So, but I'm being a little bit facetious there, but the bottom line is that's another healthy habit.
Yeah. And with your career, it's been a couple years from possibly your first job, and we were wondering if you could tell us about your journey from where you started, like receiving money at a job you had, to the point where you are a CEO of your own company.
Well, again, I grew up in a family that was very entrepreneurial, and my father in particular was very inspirational. And it wasn't that he talked a big game. He just lived his life in a way that, I learned more through osmosis with him in terms of just watching him and experiencing him. And he had a lifestyle job in running a fashion and fragrance store, business actually, global ultimately. He went off to work every day in a passionate way. He loved what he did. He had a job where he met a lot of people, and he helped shape and form things. And I think he was in a unique situation that it really worked great for him. And same thing with his wife, my stepmother, and she was the same way. So watching both of them Fred Hayman and Gail Hayman, build a store called Giorgio Beverly Hills and build Rodeo Drive along with it, and ultimately come up with a fragrance, and watch them and see how they went off to work every day. Work for me was not a 4-letter word. It was almost like a romantic, passionate thing, and that's sort of how it was watching them. And that's how it's been in my life. I've loved most of the things that I've done. And if I didn't like something, I would stop doing it. If I didn't like it, if I really didn't like it, I would just move on. And that didn't happen too many times. But, having an entrepreneurial background, seeing what happened, I went to work for the family. I went to work first after going to university, and I went to Boston University in Boston. I stayed in Boston for a little bit. Believe it or not, I started off with a job as a broker in the real estate business there, commercial real estate. And then I did well. And then I transitioned into a family business because it was very opportune to do that. And then that business got sold, and I started a consulting business. And then from there, I had an entrepreneurial, experience. I was able to work with a company that brought me on board to run the company and gave me stock. And ultimately I became the largest shareholder. But we drove that company to a lot of success. Even before that, I had another company that was in the t-shirt business. I don't know if you guys remember when the wall came down, East Berlin and West Berlin, and Russia was, Soviet Union was a conglomeration of all sorts of Eastern European countries, which are now mostly, free. Obviously, we've got something going on between Russia and Ukraine right now, and Crimea. But when the wall came down, I started, and suddenly something that had been taboo for all these years, which was the Soviet Union and an entire look that the Soviet Union had back then, I came up with a t-shirt line called Red Square Wear. And I sold it in stores like, Fred Siegel, Henry Bendel, Saks Fifth Avenue, department stores, a lot of boutique stores, Ron Ross, Ron Herman. And I did, without any expectation, I thought I'd sell a few dozen shirts on the weekends. I sold dozens of shirts, and it just did extremely well, but it was short-lived. It was a fad. And when it was done, I moved on. But that was a good experience, seeing how that worked. Walking with a garment bag, I'd be humping a garment bag going into these, into these different showrooms, clothing showrooms, and I'd show them what I had. And I was like blown away when they loved it. Can we carry that? It's like, wow. So part of it is, to me, I don't know how you guys are in terms of motivation, and maybe it's, you guys are still fairly young. And so, but, it's never been about the money for me. It's been, for me, that's just me personally. It's been more about, pride of what I do. Authorship. I did that. That's mine. I had my hands in that. Typically, there's been a team along with me to help me, but generally speaking, that's what's driven me more than anything else.
Yeah. And I kind of want to move into a new topic, leadership. So with leadership in your company, how important is it to have that kind of characteristic when your guys are kind of like solving problems?
Well, their problems are a regular part of business, and there's a statistic that says that successful business is a business that solves between 70 and 80% of its problems successfully. I guess that would mean the inverse would be, one that didn't solve 70% threshold or 80% successfully. But I think that the people who are working for you, it comes down to something that's called culture. Do you have, a culture in your company that is a performance culture? Do you have a culture in your company where it talks, where you can be transparent with people, honest and accountable? So you take account for what you've done. They take account for what you've done. And it's sort of like this common thread that goes through the company. It starts at the top, and it goes to the next level down. And you find these people, and they live that culture. And as long as I found, at least for me, I found that as long as that culture is a good culture, and it's also You got to have fun. You got to be smart. You got to be innovative in the companies that I'm involved with and I run. And of course, the accountability, the transparency is important. Those are the things that really drive results and make your job fun because people are of like mind and they're sharing a struggle. And the struggle is, something to basically achieve victory. And victory can be measured in any number of different ways. Certainly monetary could be one of them.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask you, what would be your favorite book? Because I know that there's a book called The Richest Man in Babylon that seems to be pretty popular amongst entrepreneurs. So I was just wondering, what was your favorite book?
Good question, Armani. I would say I haven't read that book, and I don't have a lot of time to read a lot of books. I do read books, and I typically have about a handful that are on my bedstand, sitting there, growing cobwebs, and dust. But seriously, I would say one of the most transformative books that I ever read was A Road Less Traveled by M. Scott Peck. And I read it twice. And if you read it, and you really read it and you take it in, it's transformative. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, first of all. And as you're going through it, it just keeps adding up. Now, that book was, #1 bestseller book for a number of years. It was that powerful. Of course, the Holy Bible is probably the #1 best-selling book of all time. And it's always regularly #1 for obvious reasons. But so that was one of them. And, for me, another 2 books that were really important in my life, and there's been others as well. But the other 2 that I would put down are by a different author, the same author. And I'm sure you've heard this before, a woman named Ayn Rand. The Fountainhead and Atlas Shrugged. And I read those, and they're like 400 and 800 pages or something. I mean, really, really long books. But it's one of the quickest reads because it just really spoke to me in terms of business. It spoke to me in terms of entrepreneurial spirit. It spoke to me in terms of what we're doing here in this country. It speaks to me in some ways as to what's going wrong with this country right now. And, hopefully we get back on track. But that really spoke to the passion in business, the passion at work, whatever it is you do. It's not always just business, but there's business in everything. So those would be the three books that I really, The Road Less Traveled, Atlas Shrugged, and The Fountainhead were 3 of the most formative books for me. That wasn't just one. Sorry, I gave you 3.
Yeah, that's great. So for our final question on the podcast, it's usually known as the big question. Are you ready?
Yep.
All right. The big question is, what is your advice to the younger generations?
I would say to young people today, first of all, I'm very impressed by the young generation. And I don't know what you mean by the young generation, but I think of anyone who's like in middle school and higher, all the way through college, I would say that's the younger generation. I don't go by all the various monikers that they have out there right now. But I would say in general is not to be a follower. And not to, question authority. Don't always just listen to what people are telling you, but wonder about whether what they're telling you is true or not. And, I think that there's nothing wrong with asking questions. And I don't like it when other people shut other people down. I think it's inappropriate, and I just think it's plain wrong. People are allowed to ask questions. I mean, to a point, right? But people are allowed to ask questions. Good questions are healthy. And if you're afraid to ask questions, it's going to stunt you in terms of where you ultimately get to. You can't be afraid to reach out and try things and try new things. And so, in general, I would try and lose this idea of fearfulness. I mean, obviously, you're at the edge of a building, it's 20 stories high, yeah, don't jump over the edge, right? That's obvious. But don't worry about what people think about you so much. I mean, if you're not doing something stupid, don't worry about failing so much. Don't worry about people think about failing. Don't worry about what people think about many things. You want to go and walk up to, an attractive guy or girl and, start talking to them because you're attracted to them, go ahead. Otherwise, you may never find out. If you want to start a business or test an idea, who cares what other people think? Do what you think is the right thing to do. And that's the other thing is, doing the right thing to do. It's, in my mind, doing the right thing has sort of been a slogan in my life. But doing the right thing isn't always the easiest thing. In fact, sometimes it's the very most difficult thing you can do, but invariably it's always long-term the right thing. It ends up with the right result, the best result, even though you may have to put in more time, more energy, more effort, more money, whatever it is to do the right thing. It makes a big difference. And so those would be the things that I would say are really important to the younger generation, any generation, but in particular today's generation. Question things. Don't just follow blindly. Ask questions. Wonder why people are telling you things. Yeah, those would be the things I'd have to really press.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for that.
Okay, guys.
Yeah, I think that's all we have for you on the Three
Thank
Peaks
you.
podcast. Thank you so much for taking the time to meet with us.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Take care.
All right. You too.
Bye-bye.